So I attempted lowering my expectations on what I was going to read for like a seasonal TBR, what I was going to put on it, and that ended up working out really well. Somehow I have only read for my fall TBR since we last spoke. So despite the fact that I haven't done a ton of reading, I am really happy with the reading that I have done, if that makes sense. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So I believe I set my autumn TBR at 21 books. I'm just gonna count real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yes, 21. 21 books. So for this video, I'm going to talk about what books I have read so far in fall, and also we're going to be doing the TBR Spin for this month. And if you've seen my last video, you know that I went through a bit of a reading slump. A bit is an understatement. It was a big reading slump. I was having a really hard time reading for a while there, and in getting out of that reading slump, I read a few books from this TBR. So I actually don't fully remember the order, but these are all books that were from the same video. So the first one up is Orange. This is by Ichigo Takano, and they did both the story and the art for this because this is a manga book. This follows Naho, and she is going to school and she ends up getting this letter from her future self saying that like she should do specific things during her day. At first she kind of like discounts it and is like, this is weird. But then the day does play out the way that the letter to herself said that it would. And so then she starts kind of paying it a little bit more mind. There is a specific goal of the letters of her future self, but I don't want to say exactly what it is because I do think it's a bit of a spoiler. I will say that it does start to feel kind of repetitive, a little bit frustrating. And then I think next was Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. So this I was almost done with when I stuck it on this TBR. It's a book about fungi, and I just thought it was a good time of year to read a book about mushrooms essentially. But it was a very interesting read. I do think like the end of it was the part that I was least interested in. I really liked like the first half of it. And then the second half I was just kind of like, okay, it is interesting. It gets very technical. And I think that I did kind of struggle with that. But I do think that like if you're into this concept or like the idea of fungi in general, like I think you're really gonna love it because it definitely does like what it sets out to do. I read this for a very specific reason and I probably wouldn't have picked it up otherwise. And I'm really glad that I did pick it up. So take with that what you will. I don't know. But yeah, I did read this for a video that is coming eventually. I forgot to say what my rating was for both of these. But for Orange, it was a 3-star, and then for Entangled Life, I gave it a 3.25. So pretty like middle of the road to like just above middle of the road. And then next we have Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This was so much fun, especially for this time of year. It's this murder mystery novel, but like the author speaks directly to you as the reader and seemingly like understands how much there is like trope-wise and everything out there in the mystery and like thriller space. He will say things that like poke fun at those tropes or mention those tropes without being too annoying. In the like prologue to it, the author or the narrator outlines which pages all of the deaths happen or are found out about. It gives you the sense of like you really want to keep reading because like the first one's on page like 14, so you're like, okay, I can read like to 14 pages and then there's already like we find out about a death then, and then the next one's like 36 or something, and it's like, okay, well I'm not that far from that. So I think that just like adds a lot to it. As the title suggests, everyone in his family has killed somebody. I think that it is like very different depending on which person that they're talking about. Each situation is super different. Basically, this like takes place at a family reunion where everybody is coming together and they're getting to see the narrator's brother for the first time. His brother has just gotten out of jail, and so he's coming to this family reunion, and it's like the first time like the whole family is seeing him again, including like his very close family members. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot of like family history stuff. There's a lot of moving parts, but it was a lot of fun, and I think there was some good twists all throughout that kept it really interesting. And I really like the way that it was told, and I'm super excited to read the next book. I think it's Everyone on This Train is a Suspect or something like that. And my rating for this one ended up being a 4.25. And then the books that I have next to talk about, I am making a video for them where I'm going to talk about them all together. There's 5 of them total. I've only actually read 4 of them at this point, but I will talk like a little bit about them in this video. But I think I'm going to save my specific ratings on them for the video itself. But honestly, like if you really wanted to, you could go on my story graph and just see them. Like I have already rated them. So the first book from that video is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is like the cozy fantasy novel. I do think that I've heard kind of mixed things, and I think for the most part I've heard that it kind of drags, and maybe that's because, you know, a lot of people were trying out maybe a genre that they hadn't tried out before. I know for me, this was my first cozy fantasy novel, I think, ever. On one hand, I did like it, and especially like the first half of it as like things are getting together, because basically we have our main character who, what was her name? Viv. She's opening a cafe in this town, and like you get to see her go through that process. You get to see her, you know, working with other people, meeting other people, and just getting this thing all together. And there is something like really satisfying about that. It's kind of like watching, you know, like a montage from like a 2000s movie where like they bought an office space and then they like fix it all up together, and it's like you feel like oddly productive and like excited and motivated and everything. It gives you those feelings, I think, for like the first half. But then obviously at a certain point, like the cafe is open, and then it's like there is storyline going along with it, but it's not a ton. Like there's not a lot to it. And I just wasn't too engaged with it. So I don't think I'm gonna put this on my series tracker, but I did have like a moderately enjoyable time reading it. Up next, I read Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is my first book by Octavia E. Butler, and I can't believe I waited this long to read anything by her. This was so good. This is supposed to be like this future and like where things have gone, largely because of the climate crisis and a lot of other like social things happening. So Lauren lives in this like fenced in community that's really just like a cul-de-sac of houses. I believe her parents remember what life was like prior to the wall being up, and, you know, needing to have this safety and like to need that wall, but they do still like go outside of it. It's not like they're within that all the time. It's closed off, but it's not like they are completely segregated from like the rest of the world. And the story starts with Lauren being like 15 years old. She also has this thing that's, they call in the book hyper empathy, where she is incredibly sensitive to the feelings of others, to the point where she can just like be looking at somebody who is in pain and displaying the fact that they are in pain, and she will feel the physical pain herself. It does such a good job of like evolving over time throughout the book, and the characters that you meet during it was such a good dynamic of characters. This is another book that's the start of a series, and I am definitely planning on reading the second book. I think it's just a duology. And the second book is Parable of the Talents, so I very much intend on picking that one up. Next we have The School for Good Mothers. This follows Frida, who is a mother to her daughter Harriet, and her ex-husband have split. Her ex-husband is like dating somebody new, but they share custody, and Frida ends up doing something terrible, and it's continually called throughout the book Frida's bad day or very bad day, but she leaves her child at home while she is supposed to like go grab coffee and like run to the office to pick something up, and basically it leads to her losing custody of Harriet, or at least her custody being called into question. So her ex-husband takes Harriet, and he's looking after her, and she has to like go to court and everything to plead her case. And then through that, she ends up at the School for Good Mothers. And so once she gets there, then the book tonally shifts, I would say, quite a bit. And I do think that there's a lot of like good discussion that it brings up through this, and like what it means to be a good mother or a good parent, and like how much you're really supposed to sacrifice of your own life, and like how you're not supposed to care about like anything else, like just this one thing. And any time that you're thinking about anything else could be like a time that something happens to your child. And the idea of like the different types of people that are brought into this group of women that are like going through this school, and how some of them have done like truly horrendous things, and some of them have done like not very bad things at all. But I do think that like the book does a good job of kind of touching on a lot of like the nuance of it, I guess. However, once I get to the school, it's incredibly slow paced. Like it feels so slow. It feels like so much of it could have been cut out. Going through like the lessons and everything, it just feels pretty repetitive, or like you're not really gaining a whole lot of new things like going through it, and that you're not really seeing a lot of change in Frida herself, despite the fact that she's going through like this pretty, what I would call like traumatic experience, like being at this school and forced to like relive this terrible thing that she did, and the thought of possibly never seeing her daughter again and like all this stuff. Overall, I think I felt, I was just so over it by the end of the book, and I was really frustrated with the ending itself. I do think that it makes sense like in retrospect, but while I was reading it, I was really frustrated. That being said, I think that about this much of the book, I was like, oh yeah, I am like really getting into this. Like I really like what this is doing, the setup and everything. And then the rest of it, I was like, I don't know. I'm just over it. Like I don't care anymore. Oh, I totally forgot about this one. This is also a part of the same video. I don't know how I totally missed that. I think that I read this one second, actually. This is A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This was my first book by T. Kingfisher, and I absolutely loved it. I am so happy to have read it. The atmosphere in it was so good. This is a Southern Gothic. It follows Sam, who goes to visit her mother at like the house that they spent some time in. Sam's grandmother's house originally. And Sam and her brother and mother had to live with her grandmother for some time, I think after Sam's father passed away. You kind of have like a little bit of an idea of what their life was like when they were staying there the first time. But then throughout the story, you get more and more of a picture of that, which I feel like it did such a good job of, because you're starting to be like, this doesn't seem that good. So Sam's mother is now living in the house that they like lived in for a while. Her grandmother's passed away, and Sam goes to visit her because her brother says that there's something like off about mom, like she's acting a little weird. And as soon as Sam gets there, she's like, oh yeah, she's acting weird. Like what is going on? The house looks different than it did previously. It's just like slowly kind of figuring out what's happening with that. And it just like escalates so much. Like the trajectory is just like a diagonal upward line the whole time. And it's great. I'm very much looking forward to reading more from this author. Okay, now this is officially my fall TBR as it stands right now. I did want to mention, because I did start a few more books. I've started A Quantum Love Story. This is the final book for the video that I was talking about. I haven't gotten very far just because I wasn't super feeling it and I didn't want to force myself through it and force myself straight back into another reading slump. I was just feeling like something like dark and deep, if that makes sense. I did start this one. I am looking forward to reading it. I'm just not, it's not what I want right now. So I'm just putting it on hold while I read another book. And so I ended up picking up Non-Disclosure by Renee D. Bondi, which was sent to me by Second Story Press. So they sent me an advanced reader copy of this, but it came out in October, so you can get it now. I decided to pick up this one because it does have, I think, the feel that I'm going for, like a much deeper read than A Quantum Love Story seemingly is. I don't know yet, I'm only 3 chapters into this one. But also it's short, so I figured it would be like a quick deviation before getting back to A Quantum Love Story. This book is about a young girl who was abused in the Catholic Church, specifically by a priest. So she's like struggling with that. She ends up like learning that other people have also gone through this, and then there's more to it there. But it's a lot more, I think, about her internal thoughts and feelings, at least for how much I've read so far. But then also it touches on the AIDS epidemic at the same time, because this is set in like the 70s to 80s, and I think maybe it continues into the 90s. But I will say that last night, I was bawling my eyes out while I was reading this in bed. Literally, it was just like a mess of waterworks. Insane. I was feeling so deeply, which I think is actually exactly what I wanted and needed. So I'm very happy to have picked this up, but so far, yeah, really enjoying it. I'm about halfway through, so still have ways to go, but I think that it was smart of me to like go for something else. And then lastly, I began reading Our Kindred Creatures by Bill Wasick and Monica Murphy. I just want to move those so they don't fall. So this was sent to me by Knopf Publishing. I was really excited to read this one, but I'm starting to think that maybe it's not my speed. I don't know what I was expecting. This book is exactly what it says it is. Like, it's a book about humans' relationships with animals and how they've like evolved over time. And yet I'm just not having fun. Like, I just don't think that I want to read it. So I'm very close to DNFing. I haven't quite decided yet. Okay, now I think we're ready for TBR Spin. So let's talk about where we're at for that. Last month, we had to swap out a book that we haven't read for one that we had already read. So my stack at the start of last month, it was just these 3 books. So I ended up deciding to swap out Wednesday's Child by Yoon Lee. I've just not had a lot of great luck with short story collections in a while, so I decided maybe now's not the time. I think I need a break. Also, I tried to read way too many of them at the same time. And then I traded in The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a book that I read maybe a couple of years ago, and then I read the second book. I think I read the full second book, and then I ended up deciding not to continue in the series, but I hung on to the series because I thought Curtis would like them. And then I ended up deciding that I did actually want to give it another shot now that I've been reading more fantasy and I think I'm like more interested in it. And I know everybody loves The Fifth Season. So this is like perfect for me for a reread. So then this was my stack. And then for the spin after the swap, it was like spooky vibes, I think. I ended up picking In the Dream House because it was the most like that I had. So now going into this month, this is my stack. So Wolf Song by TJ Klune, which I really, really, really want to read like this month. I would love if this one came up. I've been so excited about it. And The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which I'm excited about, but a little bit nervous about because obviously all the things I've already said. Okay, I have the wheel up. It's ready. We're gonna go ahead and spin. I never know what to do while I'm waiting for it to spin. Okay, a book that makes you feel like a male intellectual in the 1940s at Oxbridge. This is actually legitimately was my favorite prompt that we put on this. I expected to have a lot more books to choose from when I did. Also, I had so many good books for this throughout the year that are no longer on the stack. I feel like I kind of have to look in this general area. Can you see that? Yeah. These are my books that are from my 100 books bucket list poster. I've got a James Baldwin. I could maybe do that. Maybe I do Great Expectations. It at least was out in the 40s. I also have some nonfictions that could maybe work. I don't know. I could also see maybe Wellness by Nathan Hill, just because of what the Knicks was like. But I think the one that would most give me that feeling is Great Expectations. I think that's just where we're at. For picking a book from this prompt, you don't have to pick a book that was actually out in the 1940s, but basically just something that gives you that like dark academia feeling. Or maybe you go with the fact that it's like in England. Maybe you go for a book that's set in England. Something along those lines. I think that that totally works too. I can't believe we're almost at the end of the second year of TBR Spin. Make sure to let me know in the comments if you're still having fun with TBR Spin, if you want to continue it going into next year, if you have any ideas for it, ideas for prompts, things like that. I think that that would be really fun to hear from you all. But other than that, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed watching and consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.